All right, so good day. Welcome
day.
to
Thank
episode
you.
3 of the BPSU special podcast series in celebration of International Women's Day 2023. So I'm your honorary host, Jamila Lodge, and we're going to keep the discussion going about equity in the
Okay.
workplace. And I want to welcome you
Thank you.
and Verlicia Scott.
Yes, you said it right.
You are the office manager for ACG.
Yes, I
Okay, so
am.
before we get into all the questions, just talk a little bit about your role at ACG and how you're finding it there so far.
Okay, so essentially, I ensure that the office space functions well.
Okay.
So everyone has what they need. The space is clean. I'm kind of like a go-to person.
Okay.
I also help to oversee some of the human resource functions within the department.
Okay.
And I'm like a go-to person for my boss as well. So I work hand in hand with my boss. Her name is Dion, and I'm just that person in the office who doesn't have sides with anybody. I'm just the go-to for anyone.
Right, you're like Switzerland.
If
You're
something
like-
breaks, Verlicia will get it fixed.
Okay. And you mentioned that this is relatively a new position for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I've been there maybe 3 weeks.
Okay.
So I'm brand new.
It's honeymoon phase
Yes.
still.
And I'm loving it. At first I was, because I've never worked in that type of environment. But truthfully, I feel like I'm starting to love it.
Oh, that's
I'm starting
great.
to like notice my value and my worth within the department and becoming more confident within my role.
Oh, that's
Definitely.
awesome.
Yes.
I mean, because as office manager, like you said, you are the person. Anybody needs something, they come to you, right?
Yes, and when they're in doubt, they come to me. Even about things that I don't even know about, I just have to figure out the answer.
I love that.
And I usually do. I'm very resourceful.
Okay. Well, that's why you got the job.
Yes.
See, they knew that too. So prior to there, did you work? Where did you work before? Have you ever worked with government? Let me just ask you that.
This is actually my first government job.
Okay.
I have spent over 10 years in hospitality and customer service.
Okay.
So this is my first time having a 9 to 5 Monday to Friday job.
Yes, okay.
Yes, it's different. It's really different. And I do
Different
love
in a
it.
good way,
In
or-
a great way. I am
Okay.
enjoying the work-life balance.
Okay.
Very much.
Well, that's a big word that you use. We're always talking about work-life balance, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I would imagine, like in hospitality, like you said, you have to be available when the people need you to be available.
Absolutely.
So that's
Definitely.
a lot different than 9 to 5. So welcome to that life, girl. So we're talking about equity, right, in the workplace. So my first question is, what does equity mean to you?
Essentially, I would say equity means to me not only just giving people the same opportunity, but ensuring that they can be successful in whatever opportunity they're being given.
Okay.
Kind of seeing people where they are and filling in any gaps to kind of put them on the same playing field as anybody else who may be competing with them, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know when we have the conversation, sometimes people are like, what's the difference between equity and equality? Like, aren't they the same thing?
Yeah, they're
And I
not.
always remember that picture. I don't know if you've seen this, a picture of 3 little kids.
Yes.
And they're standing on these boxes or they're looking over a fence.
Yes.
And so equity would be that all of them are standing on the same box, right?
Yeah.
Well, then one little boy shorter
Equality.
than the other one.
Yes.
Yeah, equality would
Yes.
be everybody standing on the same box, but one little boy shorter, one's taller. So if you do that, they have the same box, but they can't all see.
Exactly.
So the equity would be making sure they could all see.
Exactly. So it like basically fulfilling any shortcomings.
Yeah.
Shortcomings.
Yeah, yeah.
But as like a leader,
Yeah.
essentially. Like I feel personally like whenever I've hired people, I know sometimes you look at education,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. But then a lot of times a person who may not have education, they have the ability to exceed in a role if given the right opportunity, or they might just need more training.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that they're not a go higher.
Yeah.
It just means that we have to do our part to make up for the opportunity that they may not have even had.
Right.
If
right.
that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense to me. So when you say that, since you're new in your role at ACG, how do you see that they are implementing equity within the team or environment at ACG?
I would say even just for me.
Yeah.
I don't have the direct experience. I don't have a college degree. However, in my interview, I assured them that I'm up for the challenge. If you give me the right tools, and I'm pretty sure that they have people with degrees and who have been office managers in corporate and companies. But thankfully, they gave me the opportunity, knowing that they had to teach me a bit more than somebody else, or train me a bit more. But they still gave me the opportunity. So I feel like I'm a perfect example of equity being like used in ACG personally.
Shout out to ACG. No, I think that's important to note, that it is not necessarily, you don't necessarily have to have the titles or the letters, I call them. But you have to have the willingness.
Definitely.
To learn. And then you seem already, like you said, people are coming to you. You're like, I don't know, but I'll figure it out.
I'll figure it out. Yes, I will.
Okay.
Definitely.
Okay. So in terms of, and maybe you've asked some of your colleagues this, and that you've just gotten there, but what are some of the other ways that you think that ACG advocates for equitable treatment of its employees? So you personally shared one of your examples, but anything else that you can speak to?
I know that after speaking with some of my colleagues, that they do what sounds like a management trainee program.
Okay.
So, for example, you have positions in ACG that you need certain qualifications for. If persons show an interest in those roles and they're not qualified, ACG will qualify them.
Gotcha.
Whether that's supporting their education, supporting training, supporting like certifications, if they want to.
Okay.
Because yes, you may have people who have those qualifications outside of ACG, but if you have people within ACG willing, as far as I've known, based on speaking with my colleagues, they will give people the resources to maximize their potential and attain those roles. Right. Which I think is incredible.
That is incredible.
It's really, really incredible. And I think that's probably why they retain staff as well.
Yeah, we mentioned retention of staff and one of the previous conversations that I had with Marilyn. And I think that's important, right? Because when you get a shining star, right, or a bright star, I would like to think that you want to keep them.
Definitely.
So you have to, I guess, create equitable practices, things to, like you said, level the playing field. If you recognize that someone has all the other things, they just may not have the piece of paper or the certification that's required to do that type of position. So that's good to hear, though. I think that's important, especially as a young person, which you are representing, by the way.
Representing the young people.
No, I think it's important because, especially the young people that I've worked with, one of the things that's important to them is the ability to grow, let's say, with an organization. So being in a place that already seems to recognize that and put things in place to support you as an employee, I think that's great.
It's really encouraging.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you, as a young person, how did you become introduced to the concept of equity versus equality?
To be completely honest, the only equity I ever knew of was as it related to finance.
Okay.
It wasn't until Hattie asked me to do this interview that I had to learn something about equity. And I realized I've always understood the concept. I just never had the word to define it.
Yes.
So I can say, like, in my own life and my own practices in the past as a leader, I have definitely utilize equity.
Okay.
However, just not realizing
that's what you were doing.
That's what I was doing.
Yeah.
So it's always something I can say it's just been a part of me and it's been a part of my values. But now I feel like I can put a name to the practice.
To what you're actually doing. Which I think is important, because sometimes you have a conversation and people are like, well, what's the difference? Like, equity and equality is the same thing. But really, when
it's
you,
not.
like, once you do the research, you're like, well, actually, it's not.
Yeah.
And I feel like sometimes we have our own kind of unconscious bias that we work with, and it goes against that, the being equitable, if that makes sense, right? And so you have to, like, work to not, rely on those unconscious biases. Like, wait a minute, is that fair? Am I doing the right thing? Am I acknowledging that maybe this person isn't where they need to be, and putting things in place to get them where they need to be? So I think that's important. So for other young people like yourself, right, who may not recognize that it's even a thing, right? How would you introduce them to the concept?
I would just introduce them to it through conversation. Like just this weekend, I was with my best friend and I asked him, what are your thoughts on equity? Which I never would have done.
Right.
Because you guys essentially started the conversation. Sometimes when you start conversations in one place, it starts conversations in other places. And that's kind of how it can get around, just through conversations, just through advocacy, just news commercials or just anything on Instagram, just kind of putting in people's faces. I think that's the main way, just to talk about it.
Yeah, I would agree with you, because sometimes when you don't know, right? But when you do, you have the opportunity to do better and to be better. Yes. So having those general conversations, just asking someone, well, what do you think about this? You'll be surprised. Sometimes you might get a different answer. You'd be like, hold on a second. We're friends? Wait a minute. Yes. I don't know. What was his response, though, when you started talking about equity?
So initially it was, why are we talking about this right now? It's the weekend. But then eventually we briefly spoke about how we can utilize it as leaders.
Okay.
He's a leader. I've always worked in leadership roles. And it was very positive. It was a very positive response. And I personally feel like he feels that it's important. But I think based on both our personalities, it's probably something that we will naturally do. But it's definitely good to now consider it, especially as you lead people. Integrity obviously is important, but that kind of falls under... equity can fall under integrity.
Yeah.
So it's good to be mindful and aware.
And it's interesting because your friend is a male, right? We're talking about International Women's Day. We're hyping up women. But it's interesting to hear that your friend is a male and he recognizes that there's a need for it too. Because I think, historically women have not necessarily been treated equitably. And we fought to get, equal rights and equal pay.
Yes.
But like you said, equal is not necessarily equitable.
Definitely.
So if you've been behind the start line, way behind the start line, and then you're like, okay, now you can play, but you haven't given me the tools or the resources to catch up, so I can have a level playing field, it becomes more difficult. And so hearing a male say, yeah, it is important. We have to put things in place. That's great to hear.
And the expectations also, we spoke about expectations. Sometimes if you have someone doing the same role who is seasoned, for example, or if you have someone who is fresh out of college or high school, the expectation has to be different, because that in itself is equity. I can't expect someone fresh out of high school to perform like someone who's been doing this for 10 years. Yeah. But what I can do is offer them resources and support to bring them up to speed. Like I have to hold them accountable, but I can't hold them as accountable, if that makes sense. I don't know how to...
Yet.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have to do everything you can to bring them up to par. Right. If that makes sense.
Yeah,
and I think
it makes
sometimes
sense.
People who are new into roles get discouraged because you have these expectations, but that's a 10-year experience expectation. You know what I mean? Like, what are we doing to bring them up to the standard? And I don't think leaders always do that.
They don't. And I think sometimes... this was also brought up in a conversation before too. It's like, well, I paid my dues, so you got to pay your dues too. Nobody told me how to do it or what to do. But I'm going to ask you, how does somebody, a young person especially, use their voice to say, okay, well, hold on a second, right? This person over here has been doing this for 10, 15 years and I just got here. Yeah. How do you have that conversation, let's say, with your employer without being, dismissive or being rude, but you're recognizing that, hey, your expectations of me are not equitable because I just got here and they've been here. How do you have that conversation?
I think they would just have to use their resources. Me personally, in the past, I have thankfully had great HR professionals like where I've worked. Especially where I've most recently worked at Hamilton Princess and Beach Club. The human resource team, they call it talent and culture. The talent and culture team there is incredible. Okay. And I felt very comfortable to go to them and use them and giving me an advice or assisting me in having difficult conversations. I would encourage people to use their resources.
Yeah.
Go to your HR professional, or find a mentor. Find people who can assist you in having those conversations, because it isn't always easy.
No.
And we don't necessarily always know how to do it, but there are people who do.
Yes.
So find those people.
Okay. I like that. I mean, it sounds simple, but it can be a bit of a challenge.
It is a challenge.
Does it have to be the people that you work with, or can you find these people anywhere?
I think you can find them anywhere, but I think when you do it within your job, it's kind of like doing something within your family.
Okay.
Most times your HR team knows your managers. They know how to handle your managers, essentially. And I think they can give you great advice.
Yes.
But I would say find someone to help you do what you want to do successfully.
Okay.
So if you can't have the conversation, if you don't feel comfortable, find someone that you trust who can assist you. I am not a professional.
Yes.
I'm still like learning and trying to make my way in this industry. So for me, I go to my mentors. I go to people who I know will give me solid advice.
Right.
In having difficult conversations or even making certain inquiries.
I mean, it takes a lot of confidence. You could have fooled me. You talk about you're not a professional. I'm like, you're on your way to being seasoned.
Thank you.
But no, I think that some of the advice that you shared is important, especially for a young person. They're finding their voice, right? Yes. And thankfully, you've had the experience like working in hospitality and customer service, so you've been able to say and articulate what your needs are and what you require in order to be successful in your position. Which I think that's where you start, right? You have to say, okay, well, I can do it. But this is what I need in order to do it to the best of my ability. And then it's also on the employer's part to say, okay, and then give you those tools, right, to help you to succeed. So it sounds like so far so good at ACG. So kudos to them. I have one last question for you. And I think it's around just in general, you know, when people, like you said, you didn't know until you were asked to do the interview, so you looked it up. Now that you know, how can the rest of us be conscious, and not just in the workplace specifically, because that's what we're talking about, but in general, you know, equity is important across the board. So how would you recommend the person on a day-to-day basis keep equity at the forefront of their minds when they're making decisions, when they're hiring people, when they're deciding who to go with, or something like that? What would you...
I think that equity has a lot to do with fairness.
Okay.
And I think sometimes when you want to, for example, make a decision, sometimes you have to make an informed decision. And you have to be aware of who your decision will affect. And at times you have to do a little research, ask around. Depending how, you know, big of a deal whatever you're doing is, don't be afraid to ask questions or even consider the people involved. Normally when we do things, we do it within a box. This is what we want to do. This is what I want. This is how I want it to be done. But I think if you're not a people-centered person, then you can't really be equitable. I think if we become more people-centered and understand that everyone comes from a different place, I think if we make more people-centered decisions and want everyone to have basically not only the same opportunity, but the same outcome, I think that people will be more successful. Or what can I say? I guess decisions will be more successful and they will better affect everybody involved. Look at you giving sage advice. No, thank you so much for spending a little bit of your time with us in celebration of International Women's Day. You have shared some gems, which I think people will take and can use, right? They're practical. Be people-centered people, okay? Let that be your guiding force to help you make equitable decisions. So thank you so much, Verlicia, for spending some of your time with us, and continue your journey, your professional journey at ACG, and I wish you all the best. Thank you very much.
All right.
It's been a pleasure.